When a retired veteran raises the American flag in his yard, he faces unexpected resistance from his community. What begins as a simple ordinance dispute quickly escalates into a deeply personal battle for respect and justice. As the courtroom drama unfolds, secrets are revealed and the true meaning of service is tested. Will this hero's legacy prevail, or will prejudice win the day? Before we dive into this unforgettable story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from today, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that will leave you inspired. Derrick Andrews woke with a purpose every morning. As sunlight began to filter through the curtains of his modest, single-story house in suburban Carolina Heights, he pulled himself upright in bed. His movements were deliberate, shaped by years of military discipline and a deep respect for routine. A quiet sense of pride filled him as he glanced at the framed photo on the nightstand. A younger version of himself, standing tall in uniform, flanked by his squad in the arid expanse of Kandahar. At 61, Derrick's body bore the marks of his service, a faint limp from shrapnel wounds, calloused hands that had gripped weapons in places most couldn't imagine, and a back that sometimes protested the simplest tasks. But he never complained. He had served his country with honor, and the scars were simply part of the cost. Dressing in his signature khaki pants and a clean polo shirt, Derrick moved to the kitchen. His mornings were quiet but meaningful. After brewing a pot of coffee, he stepped onto his front porch. It was his favorite part of the day, a moment of reflection before the world stirred to life. In the yard, the flagpole stood tall, the American flag fluttering gently in the breeze. Derrick's flag wasn't just fabric to him. It was a symbol of sacrifice, a daily tribute to friends he had lost in battle and the ideals he had fought to protect. With careful precision, he raised the flag, his movement steady despite his aching shoulder. "Morning, Mr. Andrews." A cheerful voice broke through his focus. Derrick turned to see the Baxter kids, 12-year-old Ellie and her younger brother Mason, riding their bikes along the sidewalk. They stopped near his driveway, their curious eyes fixed on him. "Mornin', Ellie. Mason," Derrick replied with a warm smile. "Are you going to tell us another story today?" Mason asked, his freckled face lighting up. Derrick chuckled. "Maybe after school. Go on now. You'll be late for class if you linger." The siblings groaned in playful protest, but pedaled away as their mother waved from down the block. Derrick tipped his cap to her, another small gesture that underscored the community's respect for him. Though Derrick lived alone, his house felt alive with reminders of his past. The walls of his living room were adorned with mementos from his time in the Army, certificates, medals, and a carefully folded flag in a shadow box. On the coffee table sat a collection of letters from his squad, many of whom still wrote to him regularly. His home wasn't extravagant, but it was his sanctuary, a place where he could honor his past and find peace in the present. Derrick's connection to the neighborhood was strong. Over the years, he had become something of a local figure, whether it was helping a neighbor with repairs, mentoring young boys in the Boy Scouts, or sharing his military experiences at the local school. Derrick's presence was felt by many. On this particular morning, as he polished the plaque at the base of the flagpole, a tribute he had installed with his own hands, his phone buzzed on the porch railing. He wiped his hands on a nearby rag and picked it up. "Hey, Derrick," came the familiar voice of Linda Matthews, a neighbor who often acted as the unofficial town crier. "Morning, Linda. What's the news today?" Derrick asked, his tone lighthearted. "Well, I wish it were better," Linda sighed. "I overheard Judge Calloway at the last HOA meeting. He mentioned something about your flagpole not meeting the neighborhood standards. Something about ordinance violations. Just thought you should know." Derrick frowned, a knot forming in his chest. He had lived in Carolina Heights for over a decade, and this was the first time anyone had raised an issue about the flagpole. "Thanks for the heads up, Linda. I'll keep an ear out," he said calmly, though his mind was already racing. After hanging up, Derrick sat back in his chair, staring at the flag as it swayed against the morning sky. The thought of someone trying to take it down gnawed at him. For Derrick, the flag wasn't just a decorative item. It was a connection to a part of himself that still lived and breathed in his memories. That afternoon, as Derrick was tinkering with an old lawnmower in his garage, a sharp knock echoed from the front door. Wiping his hands on a towel, he walked over and opened it to find a man in a neatly pressed suit. His expression was formal but curt. "Mr. Andrews?" the man asked, holding a clipboard. "That's me," Derrick replied. "I'm here on behalf of the Carolina Heights Homeowners Association. Judge Calloway has requested that all homeowners comply with the updated community aesthetic guidelines. Your flagpole, unfortunately, exceeds the allowed height and violates Section 4.2 of the ordinance." Derrick narrowed his eyes. "And what exactly am I supposed to do about that?" The man adjusted his tie. "You'll need to remove it within 10 days to avoid a fine. I have a copy of the ordinance here for your review." Taking the paper, Derrick scanned it quickly. The language was dense, filled with legal jargon, but the message was clear. His flagpole was being singled out. "Let me ask you something," Derrick said, his tone steady but firm. "How many other homes in this neighborhood have flagpoles?" The man hesitated. "I'm not sure." "Then you might want to check before coming back here with threats," Derrick interrupted, his voice carrying a sharp edge. "This flagpole isn't just decoration. It represents every soldier who's bled and died for this country. I suggest you tell Judge Calloway that." The man blinked, clearly taken aback. Without another word, he nodded and left, leaving Derrick standing in the doorway, the ordinance paper crumpling slightly in his clenched fist. Over the next few days, word of the incident spread through the neighborhood. Some residents offered their support, stopping by to reassure Derrick that they stood with him. Others avoided him altogether, reluctant to take sides in what was quickly becoming a contentious issue. Derrick remained composed, but inside he felt a simmering frustration. He had faced enemies in combat, overcome injuries that would have broken lesser men, and yet here he was, fighting a battle over something as simple and sacred as a flag. One evening, as Derrick sat on his porch with a glass of iced tea, Linda walked over and took a seat beside him. "How are you holding up?" she asked gently. "I'm fine," Derrick replied, though his voice lacked its usual conviction. "Derrick, you've done so much for this neighborhood. People look up to you. If Calloway thinks he can push you around, he's got another thing coming." Derrick smiled faintly. "It's not about me, Linda. It's about what that flag stands for. I can't let them take it down without a fight." Linda nodded. "Well, if you need anything, petitions, protests, you name it, you've got us behind you." Her words were comforting, but Derrick knew the road ahead would be difficult. He wasn't just standing up for himself. He was standing up for every veteran who had ever been silenced, overlooked, or dismissed. The tension came to a head when Derrick received a formal notice in the mail, an official summons to appear before the HOA board, presided over by Judge Calloway himself. The letter demanded that Derrick present his case for keeping the flagpole or face immediate fines and legal action. Sitting at his kitchen table, Derrick unfolded the letter and laid it beside his military records. His gaze lingered on a photo of his squad, each face a reminder of the sacrifices they had made together. As he prepared for the battle ahead, Derrick resolved that he wouldn't back down. Not now, not ever. Derrick Andrews arrived at the Carolina Heights Community Center a few minutes before the scheduled meeting of the Homeowners Association, HOA. Derrick Andrews arrived at the Carolina Heights Community Center a few minutes before the scheduled meeting of the Homeowners Association, HOA. Its sterile walls and fluorescent lighting carried an air of formality that Derrick knew all too well. This wasn't just a meeting, it was a battleground. Inside, Derrick found himself surrounded by familiar faces, though not all of them were friendly. A few neighbors gave him encouraging nods as he passed, their quiet support helping to steady his resolve. Others avoided eye contact, unwilling to acknowledge him or the controversy that had taken root in their idyllic community. At the far end of the room sat Judge Henry Calloway, a tall, imposing man with a salt and pepper beard and a reputation for strict adherence to rules. He wore a dark suit, his posture rigid and unyielding. Beside him, a row of HOA board members shuffled papers and whispered amongst themselves. Calloway's gavel rested on the table like a symbol of his authority, an unspoken reminder that in this room, his word was final. Derrick took a seat near the back, choosing to observe rather than engage just yet. He noted the subtle tension in the room, the tight-lipped expressions, the occasional side glances. It was clear that the issue of his flagpole had stirred more than a few opinions. The meeting began with the usual formalities: approval of minutes, updates on neighborhood projects, and discussions about community events. Derrick listened patiently, his focus unwavering. He knew his turn was coming, and he was ready. Finally, Calloway cleared his throat and adjusted his glasses. Next on the agenda, a compliance matter regarding Mr. Derrick Andrews' flagpole. All eyes turned to Derrick as Calloway gestured for him to step forward. Rising slowly, Derrick walked to the front of the room, his gait steady despite the weight of the moment. "Mr. Andrews," Calloway began, his tone measured but cold. "The HOA has received complaints regarding your flagpole, which exceeds the height limit specified in our community guidelines. You were issued a notice and given an opportunity to rectify the violation. Yet here we are." Derrick met Calloway's gaze, his voice calm but resolute. "Here we are indeed, Judge Calloway, and I'd like to understand why a flagpole honoring my service and the sacrifices of countless others has become such a problem." Calloway's lips tightened. "This isn't about your service, Mr. Andrews. It's about adherence to the rules. The guidelines are in place to maintain uniformity and fairness within our community." "Fairness?" Derrick echoed, a faint edge creeping into his voice. "Tell me, Judge, how many other flagpoles in this neighborhood have been cited for violations?" Calloway hesitated, his composure briefly faltering. "The issue isn't other flagpoles, it's yours." "And why is that?" Derrick pressed. "Is it because it's taller, because it's visible from the street? Or is it because someone doesn't like being reminded of what that flag represents?" A murmur rippled through the room, the tension thickening as Derrick's words hung in the air. Calloway adjusted his glasses again, his expression hardening. "Mr. Andrews, this isn't a debate about patriotism. It's a matter of compliance. If we allow exceptions for you, we set a precedent that undermines the rules for everyone." Derrick leaned slightly forward, his tone steady but unyielding. "I understand rules, Judge. I lived by them for 20 years in the Army. But there's a difference between rules that protect a community and rules that target individuals. I'm here tonight because I believe this is about more than a flagpole. It's about respect, and I won't stand by while that's taken away." The room fell silent, the weight of Derrick's words palpable. Calloway glanced at the board members as if seeking their support, but their expressions were unreadable. "Very well," Calloway said, his voice clipped. "We'll move this matter to a formal hearing. Until then, the flagpole must be removed." A collective gasp spread through the audience, followed by scattered murmurs of dissent. Derrick's jaw tightened, but he remained composed. "Thank you for your time," he said, turning to leave. As he walked back to his seat, a few neighbors whispered words of encouragement, their support a small but significant reminder that he wasn't alone in this fight. Later that evening, Derrick sat at his kitchen table, the HOA notice and a stack of military records spread before him. His lawyer, Emily Price, a sharp and determined woman in her mid-30s, reviewed the documents with a furrowed brow. "This isn't just about a flagpole," Emily said, echoing Derrick's earlier sentiment. "Calloway's targeting you, plain and simple." Derrick nodded. "I've been in enough battles to know when I'm being singled out. The question is, why?" Emily leaned back in her chair, her fingers tapping thoughtfully on the table. "Calloway's got a history of strict enforcement, but this feels personal. Have you had any run-ins with him before?" "Not directly," Derrick replied, "but he's made it clear he doesn't appreciate exceptions. That flagpole, it's not just about me, it's about everything he can't control." Emily sighed. "Well, he's not going to make this easy. We'll need more than just emotional appeals. If we're going to win this, we need a strategy." Derrick smiled faintly, his resolve unshaken. "Strategy I can do. I've spent my life planning for battles. This one's no different." Over the next few days, Derrick and Emily worked tirelessly to prepare for the hearing. They gathered evidence, interviewed neighbors, and dug into Calloway's record as HOA president. What they found was both troubling and telling. A pattern of targeting individuals who didn't conform to his rigid view of community standards. Derrick's resolve only deepened as he heard stories from neighbors who had faced similar challenges. Single mothers fined for minor infractions, elderly residents forced to make costly changes to their homes. "This isn't just about me," Derrick told Emily one evening as they reviewed their findings. "It's about everyone who's been pushed around by someone who thinks power is more important than people." Emily nodded, her expression one of quiet determination. "Then, let's make sure he knows he's met his match." The night before the hearing, Derrick stood in his yard, staring up at the flagpole. The stars and stripes fluttered gently in the cool evening breeze, a stark contrast to the storm brewing in his heart. He thought of his squad mates, the brothers and sisters who had stood beside him in the most harrowing of circumstances. He thought of the sacrifices they had made, the lives cut short, the dreams left unfulfilled. "This is for you," he murmured, his voice barely audible, "for all of you." As he turned to go inside, a car pulled up to the curb. It was Linda Matthews, her face a mixture of concern and determination. I just wanted to say, Linda began, her voice wavering slightly. "We're with you, Derrick, no matter what happens tomorrow." "Aha!" Derrick smiled, his gratitude shining through. "Thank you, Linda. That means more than you know." As Linda drove away, Derrick felt a renewed sense of purpose. The battle ahead would be tough, but he was ready. For his comrades, for his community, and for the principles he held dear, He would not back down. The courtroom was nothing like the battlefields Derrick Andrews had known, but the weight of the conflict felt eerily similar. As he stepped into the small municipal courtroom for the formal hearing on his flagpole dispute, he felt the same tension that came before a mission, a mix of calm resolve and simmering unease. The room was modest, with rows of wooden benches and a raised platform for the judge's bench. It wasn't particularly crowded, but Derrick's presence was clearly the focus. Some neighbors had come to observe, a mix of supportive faces and those merely curious about the unfolding drama. A few carried the quiet unease of people who wanted to remain neutral, unwilling to make waves in a neighborhood known for its strict social dynamics. At the front, Judge Henry Calloway sat in his usual commanding posture. His dark suit seemed to absorb the light, and his sharp, analytical gaze swept over the room like a hawk scanning its prey. To his right sat the HOA's attorney, a younger man with slicked-back hair and a confidence that Derrick suspected was more bravado than substance. Derrick took his seat beside Emily Price, his lawyer. Emily was the kind of advocate who thrived on underdog cases. Her sharp blue eyes and the brisk efficiency of her movements spoke of a mind always at work. She leaned close to Derrick, her voice low but firm. "Remember, Derrick, this isn't just about the flagpole. We're making a case for something bigger. Your right to honor your service without interference. Stay calm and let me handle Calloway." Derrick nodded, his focus unshaken. "I've stayed calm through worse, Emily. Let's win this." The proceedings began with the HOA attorney, Nathan Cole, presenting their case. "Your Honor," Nathan began, standing with an air of calculated confidence, "this matter is a simple one. The HOA has established clear guidelines for the community, including restrictions on structures like flagpoles. Mr. Andrews' flagpole exceeds those guidelines by a significant margin. While we respect Mr. Andrews' service to our country, this is not about patriotism. It's about compliance." Nathan gestured toward the board members seated nearby, who nodded in unison, their expressions carefully neutral. "The HOA is tasked with maintaining the harmony and uniformity of our neighborhood. Allowing one homeowner to disregard these rules sets a dangerous precedent." Emily rose smoothly to counter, her tone calm but pointed. "Your Honor, while the HOA's rules are important, they cannot supersede federal and state protections for veterans' rights. Mr. Andrews's flagpole is not a mere structure. It's a symbol of his service and sacrifice. The HOA's selective enforcement of this rule raises serious questions about their true motives." She walked to the front of the room, holding up a binder filled with documents. "We've reviewed records of other properties in Carolina Heights and found multiple instances of structures that exceed HOA guidelines, including flagpoles. None of these homeowners were cited. This suggests a pattern of discrimination against Mr. Andrews, one that appears personal rather than procedural." Calloway's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. Derrick could feel the tension rising in the room, the unspoken battle lines drawn between the two sides. As the hearing progressed, Derrick found himself called to the stand. The judge's gaze was piercing as he raised his right hand and took the oath. Sitting tall, he met Calloway's stare head-on. "Mr. Andrews," Nathan began, his tone measured but probing, "can you explain why you believe your flagpole should be exempt from the HOA's rules?" Derrick's voice was steady as he replied, "It's not about being exempt. It's about what that flag represents. I installed the flagpole to honor my service and the memory of those I served with. It's a reminder of the sacrifices made for the freedoms we all enjoy, including the freedom to display that flag. Nathan nodded, pretending to listen attentively. And while we all respect your service, would you agree that rules are in place to ensure a harmonious community? Derrick's jaw tightened slightly, but he remained composed. I agree that rules should serve the community, not suppress it. If those rules are applied unfairly or used to target individuals, they stop being about harmony and start being about control. The attorney smirked, a hint of condescension creeping into his tone. So you believe the HOA is targeting you specifically? I believe the evidence speaks for itself, Derrick replied firmly. Emily leaned forward. Your Honor, I'd like to submit evidence to support Mr. Andrews' claim. Calloway nodded reluctantly, and Emily handed over a folder containing photographs and written accounts from other homeowners in the neighborhood. These images show flagpoles and other structures in the neighborhood that exceed HOA guidelines, Emily explained. None of these homeowners received notices of violation. Additionally, we have statements from residents who believe the HOA has a pattern of targeting individuals who don't align with their preferences. Calloway skimmed the documents, his expression unreadable. Nathan shifted uncomfortably, clearly unprepared for the depth of Emily's research. The turning point came when Derrick was asked about his military service. Emily directed the questions, her tone reverent but purposeful. Mr. Andrews, could you share with the court the significance of the flag to you personally? Derrick took a deep breath, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. The flag represents the lives we gave to protect it. I lost friends in Afghanistan. Good men and women who didn't come home. Every morning, when I raise that flag, I think of them. It's my way of keeping their memory alive. The room fell silent, the weight of Derrick's words pressing down on everyone present. Even Calloway seemed momentarily moved, though he quickly masked it with his usual stoicism. Emily stepped closer, her voice soft but firm. And why is it important for you to have this flagpole, specifically? It's not just about the flag, Derrick replied. It's about standing tall even when life tries to knock you down. That flagpole is a symbol of resilience, not just for me, but for anyone who's ever faced a fight they couldn't walk away from. The hearing dragged on for hours, with both sides presenting their arguments. By the end, Derrick was physically and emotionally drained, but his resolve remained intact. As the judge adjourned the session, he announced that his decision would be delivered in the coming days. Derrick left the courtroom flanked by Emily and a small group of supportive neighbors, their presence a reminder that he wasn't fighting this battle alone. Outside, the evening air was cool and refreshing, a stark contrast to the tense atmosphere of the courtroom. Derrick paused on the steps, looking up at the sky, where the first stars were beginning to appear. You did great in there, Emily said, her hand resting briefly on his shoulder. Thanks, Derrick replied, his gaze distant but determined. But it's not over yet. As they walked to their cars, Derrick couldn't help but wonder what the future held. He knew this fight was bigger than him, bigger than a flagpole or a neighborhood ordinance. It was about standing up for what was right, no matter the cost. Derrick sat on his porch the next morning, staring at the flagpole that had become the centerpiece of his fight. The flag rippled in the cool morning breeze, a stark contrast to the turmoil brewing in the neighborhood. The previous day's hearing had left him drained, but also determined. If there was one thing Derrick Andrews had learned in his military career, it was that battles weren't won in a single engagement. They required strategy, resilience, and unwavering commitment. He sipped his coffee as Linda Matthews approached, holding a stack of papers. Her usual warm demeanor was replaced by a steely determination that mirrored Derrick's own resolve. "Derrick," she said, handing him the papers, "we've started a petition. People in the neighborhood are signing it to support you keeping the flagpole. So far, we've got over 50 signatures." Derrick took the papers, scanning the list of names. Some were familiar, neighbors he'd spoken to over the years, families he'd helped with odd jobs or advice. Others were surprising, people he hadn't expected to take a side. "Thank you, Linda," Derrick said, his voice thick with gratitude. "This means a lot." Linda sat beside him, her hands clasped tightly around her coffee cup. "We're not going to let Calloway bully you into taking it down. This isn't just about a flagpole, Derrick. It's about respect. For you. For everything you've done." Derrick nodded, his gaze shifting back to the flag. "That's what I'm fighting for, Linda. Not just for me, but for every veteran who's been ignored, dismissed, or disrespected." Word of Derrick's battle began to spread beyond the confines of Carolina Heights. By mid-afternoon, a local news crew had arrived to cover the story. The journalist, a young woman named Sarah Ortiz, approached Derrick with an air of professionalism tinged with curiosity. "Mr. Andrews," Sarah began, holding her microphone out as her cameraman adjusted the shot, "your fight to keep your flagpole has sparked a lot of attention. Can you tell us why this issue is so important to you?" Derrick stood tall, his voice steady despite the weight of the moment. "This flagpole isn't just a decoration. It's a tribute to the men and women I served with, those who didn't make it home and those who did, but still carry the scars. It's a reminder of the sacrifices made for the freedoms we all enjoy. Taking it down would feel like erasing their memory." Sarah nodded, clearly moved by his words. "And what do you hope comes from this fight?" "I hope it reminds people that patriotism isn't about following rules blindly. It's about honoring the principles this country was built on: freedom, respect, and unity." As the interview wrapped up, Sarah promised to air the story that evening. Derrick watched as the news crew packed up, feeling a flicker of hope. If his story could reach more people, perhaps the tide would turn. Meanwhile, Emily Price was busy building their case. In her small office, stacks of papers and photos covered her desk. She had spent hours gathering evidence, interviewing neighbors, and poring over legal precedents. Her determination to win the case had become personal. That afternoon, she called Derrick. "I've got something," she said, her voice tinged with excitement. "I found a case from a few years ago where an HOA tried to enforce similar restrictions against a veteran. The court ruled in favor of the veteran, citing federal protections." "That's great news," Derrick replied, relief evident in his tone. "How does it help us?" Emily leaned back in her chair, twirling a pen between her fingers. "It sets a precedent. If we can show that the HOA is violating your rights, we have a strong argument for why the flagpole should stay." "Let me know what you need from me," Derrick said. "I'll do whatever it takes." As the sun set over Carolina Heights, Derrick's home became a hub of activity. Neighbors who supported him gathered on his lawn, bringing lawn chairs, snacks, and even small American flags to wave. It wasn't an official rally, but it felt like one. Conversations buzzed with energy, people sharing stories of their own experiences with the HOA or expressing admiration for Derrick's courage. Among the crowd was Kyle Reynolds, a young veteran who had recently moved to the neighborhood. Kyle approached Derrick with a hesitant smile, his short-cropped hair and upright posture giving away his military background. "Mr. Andrews," Kyle said, extending a hand, "I just wanted to thank you for what you're doing. It's inspiring." Derrick shook his hand, his grip firm. "Call me Derrick, and thank you for your service, Kyle. Where did you serve?" "Afghanistan?" Kyle replied, "First tour in 2015. I heard about what you're going through and I wanted to help. Let me know if there's anything I can do." Derrick smiled, appreciating the solidarity. "Just standing here means a lot, Kyle. Thank you." As the evening wore on, Derrick shared stories of his military service with the group, his words a blend of humor and solemnity. He spoke of camaraderie, sacrifice, and the enduring bonds formed in the crucible of war. By the time the crowd began to disperse, it was clear that Derrick's fight was no longer just his own. It had become a rallying point for the community. Best of all, the rain was cloudless, the mountains were still and white, the sea was soft, and the air was refreshing. Peter had supposed that the college duns would help him relax, but the caller introduced herself as Karen Peterson, a representative from a national veterans organization. "Mr. Andrews," Karen began, "we've heard about your situation, and we want to offer our support. What you're fighting for resonates with veterans across the country." Derrick was taken aback, but grateful. "Thank you, Karen. Any support is welcome. We're mobilizing our members to write letters, make phone calls, and spread awareness. This isn't just a local issue. It's about standing up for all veterans." Derrick's chest swelled with gratitude. "I don't know what to say. Thank you." As he hung up, Derrick realized the fight had grown larger than he had ever anticipated. What had started as a neighborhood dispute was becoming a national conversation about respect for veterans and their contributions. In the days leading up to the final hearing, the tension in Carolina Heights reached a boiling point. Judge Calloway, who had maintained his stoic demeanor throughout the ordeal, began to feel the pressure. His office received a flood of emails and phone calls, some supportive but many critical of his actions. Behind closed doors, Calloway vented his frustration to Nathan Cole. "This is getting out of hand," he said, pacing his office. "We need to shut this down." Nathan, though outwardly confident, was clearly rattled. "We'll stick to the rules, Judge. The law is on our side." Calloway stopped pacing, his expression hardening. "It had better be. I won't be undermined by one man's sentimentality." On the evening before the final hearing, Derrick stood alone in his yard, gazing up at the flagpole. The stars and stripes fluttered gently in the breeze, their movement almost hypnotic. He thought of the men and women he had served with, their faces etched into his memory. "This is for all of you," he murmured, his voice barely audible, "for everything we fought for." The sound of footsteps behind him broke his reverie. Turning, he saw Emily approaching, her expression a mix of determination and reassurance. "Are you ready for tomorrow?" she asked. Derrick nodded. "I've been ready since the day they told me to take it down." Emily smiled. "Good, because I think we're going to win this." As she walked away, Derrick felt a surge of resolve. The battle wasn't over, but he was ready to face whatever came next. The day of the final hearing arrived, with an uncharacteristically gray sky hanging over Carolina Heights. The subdued light mirrored the tension that Derrick Andrews felt as he dressed that morning. He took extra care with his appearance, polished shoes, a crisp button-down shirt, and the tie he'd worn to his retirement ceremony from the Army. On his lapel, he pinned a small American flag, a silent but powerful reminder of what the day was about. Derrick stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the tie with hands that were steady, despite the stakes. He took a deep breath, glanced at the photo of his squadmates on the dresser, and whispered, "This one's for all of us." The municipal courtroom was filled to capacity by the time Derrick arrived. Word of the case had spread, and many in the community had come to watch the conclusion of the dispute that had divided their neighborhood. On one side, Derrick's supporters sat in quiet solidarity, many wearing pins or holding small American flags. On the other, HOA loyalists, led by Judge Henry Callaway, were expressions of rigid disapproval. At the front of the room, Judge Callaway presided with his usual air of authority. Beside him sat Nathan Cole, shuffling through a stack of papers with exaggerated confidence. Across the aisle, Emily Price arranged her own files with practiced precision. Derrick took his seat next to her, meeting her reassuring smile with a nod. "We've got this," Emily whispered. "Just tell the truth. That's all you need to do." Derrick leaned back, exuding the quiet confidence that had carried him through years of service and countless challenges. This was no different. It was just another mission. Callaway rapped his gavel sharply. "This hearing will come to order. Today, we address the matter of Mr. Derrick Andrews' flagpole and its compliance, or lack thereof, with the Carolina Heights HOA guidelines." Nathan Cole stood first, stepping confidently to the center of the room. "Your Honor, the facts of this case are simple. Mr. Andrews' flagpole exceeds the HOA's height restrictions. While we respect Mr. Andrews' service, the rules must apply equally to everyone. Allowing exceptions undermines the very foundation of our community guidelines." He paced slowly, his tone dripping with condescension. "This isn't about patriotism, it's about fairness. We cannot permit one homeowner to disregard the rules because of personal sentiment." Derrick felt the anger rise in him, but he remained composed. Emily rose next, her voice calm but pointed. "Your Honor, the facts may be simple, but the context is not. This case isn't about a flagpole. It's about a man's right to honor his service and the sacrifices of his comrades. It's about whether this community values its veterans or treats them as inconveniences." She held up a folder. "We've submitted evidence showing that other homeowners in this neighborhood have structures that violate HOA guidelines, yet none of them were cited. This selective enforcement raises serious questions about the HOA's motives." Callaway's face remained impassive, but his fingers tapped the gavel, betraying a hint of irritation. Derrick was called to the stand. As he made his way to the front, the room seemed to hold its breath. He raised his right hand, swore to tell the truth, and took his seat, meeting Callaway's gaze with unflinching resolve. Nathan approached him first, his tone polished but accusatory. "Mr. Andrews, can you explain why you believe your flagpole should be exempt from the HOA guidelines?" Derrick's voice was steady. "It's not about being exempt. It's about honoring my service and the men and women I served with. That flagpole is a reminder of the sacrifices we made and the freedoms we fought to protect." Nathan smirked faintly. "And you believe your personal history justifies disregarding community rules?" "I believe respect for service and sacrifice is more important than rigid rules," Derrick replied firmly. Nathan attempted to press further, but his questions only served to highlight the pettiness of the HOA's position. By the time he sat down, the room's mood had shifted subtly in Derrick's favor. Emily approached the stand, her tone softer but no less determined. "Mr. Andrews, could you share with the court why the flagpole holds such personal significance for you?" Derrick took a deep breath, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I raised that flag to honor the people I served with, friends who never made it back. It's not just a flagpole. It's a promise I made to myself to never forget them. Every time I raise that flag, I remember their names, their faces, and the sacrifices they made." The room was silent. Even Callaway seemed momentarily moved, though he quickly masked it with a neutral expression. Emily stepped closer. "And what do you hope comes from this hearing?" "I hope it reminds people that the freedoms we have weren't free," Derrick said, "that the flag isn't just a symbol, it's a commitment to those who fought for it." After Derrick stepped down, Emily introduced their final piece of evidence, a letter from a former HOA board member who had resigned due to Callaway's overreach. The letter detailed a pattern of targeting certain homeowners, particularly those who didn't conform to Callaway's rigid standards. "This letter proves that this case isn't about compliance," Emily argued. "It's about power and control." Callaway's expression darkened, but he said nothing. The tension in the room was palpable as he announced a short recess to deliberate. During the break, Derrick stood outside the courthouse, surrounded by supporters. Linda Matthews handed him a cup of water, her face filled with encouragement. "You did great in there," she said. "We're all behind you." Derrick nodded, his gratitude evident. "Thank you, Linda. Whatever happens, I'm proud of what we've done." A young boy approached, holding a small American flag. "Mr. Andrews," he said shyly, "my dad said you're a hero. Thank you for your service." Derrick crouched slightly, meeting the boy's eyes. "Thank you, son. That means more than you know." When the court reconvened, the room was silent as Callaway prepared to deliver his ruling. He cleared his throat, his tone measured but heavy. "After reviewing the evidence and hearing testimony from both sides, I find that the HOA's enforcement of its guidelines has been inconsistent, and in this case, unjust. The flagpole will remain." A collective gasp filled the room, followed by quiet cheers from Derrick's supporters. Derrick exhaled deeply, relief washing over him. Callaway continued, his tone begrudging. "However, I urge the HOA to revise its guidelines to ensure clarity and fairness moving forward." The gavel struck, and the case was closed. Outside the courthouse, the atmosphere was jubilant. Neighbors surrounded Derrick, offering congratulations and handshakes. Emily stood beside him, her expression one of quiet triumph. "We did it," she said. "No," Derrick replied, his gaze on the flag waving in the distance. "We all did it." As the crowd began to disperse, Derrick took a moment to himself. Standing beneath the sky, he looked up at the flag, his heart swelling with pride. This victory wasn't just for him. It was for every veteran who had ever fought for the right to be seen, heard, and respected. The battle was over, but its impact would endure. Derrick knew that, much like the flag he raised every morning, the principles he had fought for would continue to stand tall. Derrick Andrews didn't realize how much his victory would resonate until the following morning. He stood in his front yard, watching as cars slowly rolled past, their drivers honking and waving in support. Some stopped altogether, handing him letters, small flags, or simply offering heartfelt thanks for standing his ground. His flagpole, which had once been a source of division, was now a symbol of unity and resilience. The Carolina Heights community, fractured by weeks of tension, began to come together in ways Derrick had not anticipated. Linda Matthews arrived mid-morning, her arms laden with a tray of muffins. "Looks like the whole town's on your side now," she said, her grin wide. Derrick chuckled, accepting a muffin. "Feels like it. I'm glad people are seeing what this fight was really about." "It's more than that, Derrick," Linda replied, her voice softening. "You reminded people what it means to care about something bigger than themselves." As the day wore on, a steady stream of visitors arrived at Derrick's home. Veterans from surrounding neighborhoods came to shake his hand, some sharing their own stories of battles fought on the battlefield and at home. One man, a retired Air Force pilot named Howard Gaines, was particularly moved. "I heard about what you did, Derrick," Howard said, his voice thick with emotion. "I can't tell you how many times I've felt invisible since I retired. What you did, it wasn't just for you, it was for all of us." Derrick clasped Howard's hand, his own eyes misting. "We've all given something, Howard. This fight was just my way of giving back." The growing momentum wasn't limited to Derrick's front yard. Across social media, photos of Derrick standing by his flagpole, his determined expression framed by the stars and stripes, began to circulate. A video of his courtroom testimony posted by a local reporter went viral, garnering thousands of views and comments. One comment read, "This man is a true patriot. We need more people like Derrick Andrews reminding us of what matters." Another said, "As a veteran, I've never felt prouder. Thank you, Mr. Andrews, for standing up for all of us." The outpouring of support was overwhelming, and Derrick found himself at the center of a movement he hadn't anticipated. Calls came from veterans organizations, local politicians, and even national news outlets, all wanting to feature his story. Derrick, ever humble, accepted these opportunities with the same quiet dignity he had shown throughout the fight. The highlight of the week came when the Carolina Heights community organized a special event in Derrick's honor. The small park at the center of the neighborhood, often used for festivals and fairs, was transformed into a sea of red, white, and blue. Banners reading, "Thank you, Derrick," hung from trees and patriotic decorations. Derrick arrived to find the entire neighborhood gathered, their faces alight with gratitude and pride. Children waved small flags, and a group of local veterans stood at attention, saluting as Derrick entered the park. Linda Matthews stepped forward, taking the microphone. "Today, we're here to honor not just a man, but an idea. A reminder of what it means to stand for something. Derrick Andrews, you didn't just fight for your flagpole. You fought for all of us. And for that, we thank you." The crowd erupted in applause, and Derrick, overwhelmed, stepped forward to speak. "Thank you," he began, his voice steadied despite the lump in his throat. "I didn't expect any of this. When this started, I was just trying to protect something that mattered to me. But along the way, I realized it wasn't just about me. It was about all of us, about what we stand for as a community and as a country." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the crowd. "The flag outside my home isn't just a piece of fabric. It's a symbol of the sacrifices so many of us have made. It's a reminder of the freedoms we all share. And seeing all of you here today, well, it tells me those sacrifices weren't in vain." The crowd cheered, and Derrick stepped down, his heart full. As the celebration continued, Derrick found himself surrounded by neighbors and friends, all eager to share their support. One woman, a young mother named Karen Wilson, approached him with her son in tow. "Mr. Andrews," Karen said, her voice trembling slightly, "I wanted to thank you. My grandfather was a World War II veteran, and he always said that the flag was more than a symbol, it was a promise. Seeing what you did reminded me of that." Derrick crouched to the boy's level, smiling. "What's your name, son?" "Matthew," the boy replied, clutching a small flag. "Well, Matthew," Derrick said, his tone gentle, "never forget what your mom said. The flag is a promise to always honor those who gave everything for us." Matthew nodded solemnly, his eyes wide with understanding. The event also brought unexpected reconciliation. Among the attendees was Henry Calloway, the judge whose actions had ignited the conflict. He stood at the edge of the crowd, his expression unreadable. Derrick noticed him, and to everyone's surprise, walked over. "Judge Calloway," Derrick said, extending a hand, "thank you for coming." Calloway hesitated before taking the offered hand. "I wasn't sure I should," he admitted, "but seeing all this, I can't deny you've done something remarkable." Derrick nodded, his tone even. "It was never about winning or losing, Judge. It was about respect. For the flag. For the people it represents." Calloway's gaze dropped, and for a moment, he seemed humbled. "Perhaps I lost sight of that. I hope you'll accept my apology." "I already have," Derrick said, his voice firm but kind. "We can all learn something from this." The handshake between them was brief but powerful, a symbol of the bridges that had begun to rebuild in the community. In the weeks that followed, Derrick's fight continued to inspire. With Emily Price's help, he launched a local initiative to support veterans facing similar challenges. The program, called Standing Tall, provided legal assistance and advocacy for veterans dealing with housing disputes and other injustices. Emily, now fully invested in the cause, became a key figure in the initiative. "This isn't just about laws," she said during the program's launch event. "It's about making sure our veterans are treated with the dignity they deserve." The initiative quickly gained traction, with volunteers from across the region offering their time and resources. Derrick, ever modest, downplayed his role. But those involved knew the truth. Without his courage, none of it would have been possible. One evening, as Derrick sat on his porch watching the sunset, he reflected on the journey. The flagpole stood proudly in his yard, its shadow stretching across the grass. It was more than a victory. It was a testament to the power of resilience, community, and the enduring spirit of those who fight for what's right. As the sky darkened and the stars began to appear, Derrick saluted the flag one last time before heading inside. The fight had been won, but its lessons would live on, carried by those who had been inspired to stand tall in their own lives. The weeks following Derrick Andrews' victory in court marked the beginning of a new chapter, not just for him but for the entire community of Carolina Heights. What had started as a heated dispute over a flagpole had grown into a movement that touched lives far beyond the boundaries of their small neighborhood. For Derrick, life returned to a new kind of normal. He still woke every morning at dawn to raise the flag in his yard, his salute sharp and steady as ever. But now, his solitary ritual was often joined by others, neighbors, fellow veterans, and even strangers who had been inspired by his story would stop by to join him, their presence a reminder that the fight for respect had resonated deeply. One such morning, Derrick noticed a car pull up just as he finished raising the flag. A woman stepped out, her demeanor confident but warm. She wore a blazer adorned with the pin of the American flag and introduced herself as Cynthia Monroe, a representative from the state legislature. "Mr. Andrews," she began, shaking his hand firmly, "I've been following your story. And I have to say, it's incredibly inspiring. What you've done here has reminded so many of us about the importance of standing up for our veterans." "Thank you," Derrick replied, his humility evident. "I wasn't looking to inspire anyone. I just wanted to do what was right." Cynthia smiled. "Sometimes doing what's right is the most inspiring thing of all. I'm here because we're drafting a new bill to protect veterans' rights in HOA-governed communities. Your case has highlighted a gap in the law, and we want to ensure that what happened to you doesn't happen to anyone else." Derrick was taken aback. "I appreciate that. But I'm just one man. This fight, it wasn't just about me." Cynthia nodded. "Exactly. That's why this legislation is so important. We're calling it the Andrews Act, in your honor." The words left Derrick momentarily speechless. He had never sought recognition, but the thought of his struggle leading to meaningful change filled him with a quiet pride. The announcement of the Andrews Act brought a renewed wave of attention to Derrick's story. News outlets reached out for interviews, and veterans organizations across the country began citing his case as a rallying point for broader reforms. Derrick handled the attention with the same calm dignity he had shown throughout his ordeal, always redirecting the focus to the men and women who had served alongside him. One evening, he sat down for a televised interview with Sarah Ortiz, the same journalist who had first covered his story. The studio lights were bright, but Derrick's presence was steady as he answered her questions. "Mr. Andrews," Sarah began, "your fight has inspired thousands of people. What do you think has resonated most with those who've heard your story?" Derrick thought for a moment before responding. "I think people see a bit of themselves in this fight, whether it's veterans standing up for their rights or anyone else facing an injustice. It's about the principle. It's about showing that one voice, when it's speaking the truth, can make a difference." "And how has this experience changed you personally?" Sarah asked. Derrick smiled faintly. "It's reminded me of the power of community. I didn't win this fight alone. The people who stood by me, my neighbors, my friends, even strangers, they made it possible. It's proof that when we stand together, we're stronger." Back in Carolina Heights, the sense of unity that Derrick had fostered continued to grow. Linda Matthews, ever the organizer, spearheaded a neighborhood committee dedicated to supporting local veterans. The committee hosted fundraisers, organized care packages for deployed troops, and even began planning a memorial garden for the community. At one of the committee's meetings, Derrick was invited to speak. Standing before a room full of familiar faces, he felt a deep sense of gratitude. "When this started," he began, "I never imagined it would lead to anything like this. But seeing all of you here working together proves that something good can come out of even the toughest battles. Thank you for being part of this." The applause that followed was heartfelt, a testament to the respect Derrick had earned. One of the most emotional moments came when a young man named James Carter approached Derrick after the meeting. James, barely in his 20s, was a newly returned Marine, struggling to find his place in civilian life. "Mr. Andrews," James said, his voice hesitant, "I just wanted to thank you, seeing what you've done. It's given me hope. I've been feeling lost since I got home, but you've reminded me that I'm not alone." Derrick placed a firm hand on James's shoulder. "You're never alone, son. We've all been through it, and if you ever need someone to talk to, I'm here." The moment was small, but for James it was life-changing. Derrick's willingness to offer guidance and support became a lifeline for many young veterans in the area. As the Andrews Act gained momentum in the state legislature, Derrick found himself invited to testify before a committee in support of the bill. The hearing, held in the Capitol building, was a far cry from the small municipal courtroom where his fight had begun. But as Derrick took his seat and adjusted the microphone, he approached it with the same determination. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "I'm here today not as a politician or a lawyer, but as a veteran, someone who's seen firsthand what it means to fight for freedom and what it means to feel like that fight isn't recognized at home." He paused, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "This bill isn't about me. It's about every veteran who's ever been told they don't belong, who's ever been made to feel like their sacrifices don't matter. Passing this bill won't just protect veterans. It'll send a message that we value their service, not just with words, but with action." The committee room was silent as Derrick finished, his words hanging in the air like a challenge. By the time the hearing ended, it was clear that the Andrews Act had strong support. Months later, Derrick stood on the steps of the state capitol as the governor signed the Andrews Act into law. Beside him stood Emily Price, Linda Matthews, and a group of local veterans who had rallied behind him from the start. Cameras flashed, and applause echoed across the courtyard, but Derrick remained humble. "This isn't my victory," he said quietly to Emily. "It's all of ours." "It's yours too," Emily replied with a smile. "Don't forget that." As life in Carolina Heights settled into its new rhythm, Derrick found himself reflecting on the journey. The flagpole still stood tall in his yard, but it now carried an even greater significance. It wasn't just a tribute to the past, it was a beacon of hope for the future. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Derrick sat on his porch, a cup of coffee in hand. The sound of children playing echoed down the street, mingling with the faint rustle of the flag in the breeze. For the first time in a long time, Derrick felt a profound sense of peace. The battle had been hard fought, but the victory was worth it, not because he had won for himself, but because he had proven that standing up for what's right could inspire others to do the same. And as the stars began to dot the sky, Derrick Andrews knew one thing for certain. His flag, his fight, and his faith in his community would stand tall, just as they always had. The Andrews Act had passed, but for Derrick Andrews, the journey didn't end with a signature or a press conference. It marked the beginning of a legacy he had never imagined leaving behind. His quiet life in Carolina Heights had transformed into something much larger, a mission to ensure that no veteran ever felt silenced, forgotten, or disrespected. Weeks after the law was enacted, Derrick's home became a hub of activity. Veterans, advocates, and community leaders frequently stopped by to discuss their own challenges and ideas. Derrick listened to each story, his patience and understanding unwavering. For many, his calm presence and lived experience were more impactful than any speech or rally. One afternoon, Derrick sat on his porch with Emily Price. The two had become close allies, their shared fight forging a bond built on mutual respect. Emily had recently been approached by a national advocacy group interested in expanding the work they'd started in Carolina Heights. "So, Derrick," Emily said, sipping her iced tea, "they want to take what we've done here and go national. Build a network of legal support for veterans facing housing and community disputes." Derrick raised an eyebrow. "That's ambitious." Emily nodded. "It is, but if anyone can inspire people to make it happen, it's you." Derrick leaned back in his chair, watching the flag sway gently in the breeze. "I never set out to inspire anyone, Emily. I just wanted to do what was right." "And that's exactly why you inspired so many," she replied, her tone firm. "People see your integrity, Derrick. It reminds them of what really matters." After a long pause, Derrick nodded. "If it'll help other veterans I'm in, whatever you need, let's do it." The initiative, named Standing Tall, was officially launched a month later. The inaugural event was held at the Carolina Heights Community Center, now a place of pride rather than division. The room was packed with veterans, community members, and advocates who had come from across the state to celebrate the new program. Derrick stood at the podium, his calm but powerful presence commanding the room. He glanced at the rows of faces, young and old, civilians and service members alike, and felt a swell of gratitude. "Standing Tall isn't just a name," he began, his voice steady. "It's a promise that no veteran will ever have to face their battles alone. Whether it's a housing dispute, a legal fight, or just the daily challenges of civilian life, we're here to stand with them. The applause that followed was thunderous, but Derrick didn't linger on the praise. Instead, he spent the evening speaking one-on-one with attendees, listening to their stories and offering quiet words of encouragement. As the initiative grew, Derrick's life became busier than he had ever imagined. He traveled to other states to share his story and advocate for similar laws, often joined by Emily or Linda. Each trip reinforced the importance of their mission, as Derrick met veterans who had faced challenges far greater than his own. In Texas, he met Miguel Ortega, a disabled veteran who had been evicted from his apartment for installing a ramp without landlord approval. In Michigan, he spoke with Carol Thompson, a retired Navy officer who had been fined by her HOA for displaying a memorial garden in her yard. Each story fueled Derrick's determination to expand Standing Tall's reach. "It's bigger than a flagpole," Derrick told a group of lawmakers in Washington, D.C. "It's about respect. It's about recognizing the sacrifices veterans have made and ensuring they're treated with the dignity they deserve." Back in Carolina Heights, Derrick's impact was felt in more personal ways. The neighborhood, once divided by the flagpole dispute, had become a close-knit community united by shared values. Linda Matthews organized regular events, from potlucks to care package drives for deployed troops. The memorial garden, completed with the help of Derrick and several local veterans, became a cherished gathering place for reflection and remembrance. One sunny afternoon, Derrick found himself sitting on a bench in the garden, watching as a young boy placed a small bouquet of flowers at the base of the memorial. The boy's father, a veteran himself, approached Derrick with a smile. "Mr. Andrews," the man said, "I just wanted to thank you. This garden, it means so much to our family. My son asked me about the names on the plaque, and it gave me the chance to tell him about the people who've made this country what it is." Derrick nodded, his voice soft. "That's what it's all about, making sure we never forget." The following Veterans Day, Carolina Heights hosted its first annual Honor Walk, a parade and ceremony dedicated to celebrating the service of veterans in the community. Derrick was asked to serve as Grand Marshal, a role he accepted with his usual humility. The parade route was lined with neighbors waving flags and holding signs that read, "Thank you, veterans." Derrick, seated in a vintage convertible, waved back, his expression one of quiet pride. Behind him marched veterans from every branch of the military, their heads held high as the crowd cheered. At the ceremony that followed, Derrick stood at the podium, flanked by the American flag and the newly dedicated Memorial Garden. "Today, we honor those who have served," he said, his voice resonating across the park. "But let's not stop here. Let's honor them every day with our actions, our respect, and our commitment to ensuring their sacrifices are never forgotten." As the years passed, Derrick's legacy continued to grow. The Andrews Act inspired similar legislation in other states, and Standing Tall expanded into a nationwide network of support for veterans. Derrick remained at the heart of the movement, though he often deflected credit to the many people who had joined the cause. One evening, as he sat on his porch with Emily and Linda, the three friends reflected on how far they had come. "Did you ever think it would turn into this?" Linda asked, gesturing toward a newspaper featuring a headline about Standing Tall's latest achievements. "Never," Derrick admitted, "but I'm glad it did. It's proof that one voice can make a difference." Emily smiled. "You didn't just make a difference, Derrick. You made history." In his later years, Derrick found joy in the simple things: Quiet mornings on his porch, visits from friends and family, and the sight of his flagpole standing tall against the Carolina sky. Though his life had taken an unexpected turn, he never regretted the path it had led him down. One morning, as he raised the flag, a young girl passing by on her bike stopped to watch. She waved shyly, and Derrick waved back, a smile spreading across his face. "Is that your flag?" she asked. "It belongs to all of us," Derrick replied, "but it's my honor to take care of it." The girl nodded, her eyes wide with curiosity. Why do you raise it every day?" Derrick's smile deepened. "Because it reminds me of the people who've made this country what it is, and because it reminds me that no matter how hard the fight, we can always stand tall." As the girl rode away, Derrick turned back to the flag, his heart full. The fight that had begun with a single flagpole had become so much more, a testament to the power of resilience, community, and the enduring spirit of those who refused to back down. Derrick saluted the flag, the morning sun catching the red, white, and blue as it fluttered proudly in the breeze. For him, it was more than a symbol. It was a legacy,